You often hear in MMA that suffering a loss can be the true making of a fighter. As humbling as that event may be, most generally double down and are reinvigorated to train harder. After all, journeys in this sport are rarely linear, with most enduring plenty of ups and downs throughout the tenure of their career. But as you can imagine, not all people respond to, well, really anything in the same way, and defeat is certainly no exception. And when an unbeaten fighter's seeming invincibility is shattered for the first time on the world stage, it can potentially create a powder keg situation that some struggle to ever pick themselves back from. I'm Tom from MMA On Point, and these are 10 undefeated fighters that never recovered after their first loss. Number 10, Paulo Filho. Former undefeated WEC middleweight champion Paulo Filho was considered the second best middleweight in MMA during the mid-2000s, only under Anderson Silva at the time, and rightly so. He had 8 wins in Pride and 2 title defences to his name in the WEC, but these victories were shielding some deep problems buried into Filho's personal life, as he was suffering with mental health difficulties and heavy addictions to cocaine and painkillers. This took a devastating toll on Filho, resulting in his 16-fight undefeated streak coming to a particularly rough end. Following a bizarre ending in the first fight with controversy over whether Chael tapped verbally or not, an attempt to rebook the matchup failed when Paulo found himself in drug rehab. So when Filho finally returned for his second title defense against Chael Sonnen, he came in a full 7 pounds above the weight limit, making it a non-title affair. The fight itself was its own spectacle, as he appeared strangely confused and distracted during their fight. As a result, Sonnen won the decision and moved on to the UFC, while Filho wasn't given the same opportunity because of everything that had happened. The Brazilian would continue competing for well over 5 years, and although he had some decent success early on, he never found himself on the world stage again, and only won a single time in his last 3 years of competition, ending in 2014. Number 9, Karolina Kovalkova. Many forget that MMA's calmest fighter Karolina Kovalkova was actually undefeated when she challenged Joanna Jędrzejczyk for the strawweight title in 2016. She was the KSW flyweight champion and had picked up 3 straight victories in the UFC, including a decision victory over future world champion Rose Namajunas to extend her record to 10-0. Karolina definitely had her moments against Joanna, leaving her with a golf ball sized hematoma on the side of her face, but was ultimately outclassed like many others during that time over the course of their 5-round battle, etching the first blemish on her record. In the years following her title fight, Kovalkova would slowly descend down the strawweight rankings, losing 4 of her next 6 bouts, including that devastating one-punch KO from Jessica Andrade. As it stands today, Karolina is now in her mid-30s and has openly questioned her motivation to keep fighting. Perhaps these doubts can be reversed, as she has just accepted a new matchup at the time of this recording, but for the time being, it remains a lingering question in sharp juxtaposition to her previously unbeaten status. Number 8, Brett Rogers. In the mid to late 2000s, a new heavyweight talent by the name of Brett Rogers was knocking out absolutely everyone in his path. He had 10 fights and 10 first round KOs or TKOs, including a 3-0 stint in Elite XC, also including a 22-second demolition of former UFC heavyweight champion Andrei Arlovski. With such a monumental one-sided win to his name, Rogers could only continue fighting the very top dogs in Strikeforce, but in hindsight, he was truthfully underexperienced for the situation he was in. And Rogers had a pretty simple assignment for his next outing. Oh, you know, only the greatest goddamn fighter on the planet Earth at that point, Fedor Emelianenko. He was unbeaten in 27 bouts, while Rogers had quite literally just 12 minutes of fight time in his entire career. So even though Rogers had some surprising success in the early going, Fedor would ultimately finish him spectacularly and subsequently hand Rogers his first defeat. Things would spiral downhill both inside and outside of competition, however, as he'd suffer stoppage losses in his next 2 Strikeforce fights and get fired after pleading guilty to domestic violence charges. When Rogers returned to MMA from a short jail sentence, he went 1-1 in Bellator, then found himself disappearing into obscurity on the regional circuit, trading wins and losses in Ecuador, Japan and Russia, never returning to that ever elusive limelight ever again. Number 7, Gray Maynard. There aren't many fighters who have come quite as close to winning UFC gold as Gray Maynard. He had lightweight champion Frankie Edgar extremely wobbly early on in both of their 2011 title fights and was just one clean shot or two away from becoming champion, if not for Frankie's somehow uncrackable chin. This led to a draw in the first bout, prompting one better in the rematch with a knockout by Frankie to retain his title. This KO defeat and loss in general was the first of Maynard's professional career, not including his exhibition loss on The Ultimate Fighter to Nate Diaz, which he avenged after the show the first time they fought professionally, coupled with Jim Miller and even Edgar early in their careers. It was only expected that Maynard would be a UFC champion sooner rather than later, but unfortunately for him, he'd never truly recover from that first defeat. He went from 10-0 with only that draw to Frankie to losing 6 of his next 9 in the UFC, including a winless run spanning more than 4 years. Since that time, he has been released from the UFC and at the time of this recording has no fights currently booked outside of the promotion. Number 6, Kat Zingano. After picking up various regional titles, undefeated Kat Zingano made her way to the UFC in 2013 and continued her winning ways. She had back-to-back third-round TKO victories over one of the most respected names in women's MMA at the time, Miesha Tate, and the soon-to-be widely regarded as the best ever female fighter, Amanda Nunes. These huge victories set her up for a shot at the then queen of MMA, Ronda Rousey, for the bantamweight title. How times have changed. Despite being undefeated, Kat was of course for that time a heavy underdog, but her durability and strength suggested this wouldn't be yet another walk in the park for Ronda. Infamously though, Kat's first loss ended up being the quickest finish in a UFC title fight at the time, as she was just wrapped up in a patented Rousey armbar in only 14 seconds. After losing her undefeated record, Zingano never climbed to the upper echelons of the UFC again, managing just a single victory in the next 4.5 years within the UFC, a time frame in which she lost a further 3 fights, ultimately leading to her release from the company in August of 2019. Number 5, Shane Carwin. With an NCAA Division II wrestling base, uncanny knockout power and banana-sized fingers, Shane Carwin possessed many elite level talents at the top of the UFC's heavyweight division. At the height of his career, Carwin had a perfect record, 12 first round finishes in 12 fights. He had knocked out the likes of Gabriel Gonzaga and Frank Mir to hold the interim heavyweight title while Brock Lesnar battled diverticulitis. But when the two met, Lesnar was able to weather Carwin's unbelievable power by shielding up as much as he possibly could in a fight that most refs outside of Josh Rosenthal's judgment would have easily stopped. But letting it continue proved to be the right call as Brock majestically rose like a phoenix from the orphan turtle position, and in the second round, he submitted Carwin with an arm triangle. Oh MMA, you make absolutely no sense. Anyhow, following this, he replaced the again ill-stricken Lesnar to face one of the most elite heavyweight strikers in MMA history, Junior Dos Santos. The Brazilian beat Carwin to a bloody mess over 3 rounds, and in the aftermath of various neck and back surgeries over the years, Carwin decided it was too much and that it was time to hang up the gloves. He did knock out some guy in 2016 with his right arm taped to his body for charity, so it ended well enough, I suppose. Number 4, Chris Weidman. When Chris Weidman ascended the UFC's middleweight division by defeating the great Anderson Silva back-to-back in 2013, many predicted a long, healthy title reign, so no one could have foreseen that Chris's first taste of defeat would send his career spiraling into descent, but of course that's exactly what happened. After the second Silva fight, Weidman secured a pair of standout title defenses against former UFC champions in Lyoto Machida and Vitor Belfort, extending his record to 13-0, at which point there was a legit case case for Weidman being among the 5 best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport. His first loss, however, came after he and Luke Rockhold went back and forth for 2 rounds before Rockhold capitalised on an ill-fated spinning back kick from Weidman and laid on some rough ground and pound to violently and forcefully muscle the title away. A man of Weidman's calibre, though, was expected to bounce back instantly, and even in some great performances early on, found himself on the wrong end of devastating finishes, losing 4 of his next 5. Granted, these were against the best in the division, but the former champion's career has sadly gone from bad to worse after his first defeat. He still competes to this day though, and vows to return to his winning ways. Number 3, Ben Askren. You have to give Ben Askren credit for putting his undefeated record at risk in the UFC when he came back out of retirement in 2019 with more than a year's layoff. He could have easily enjoyed life after fighting and left us with those what if questions and an untouched record, but at 34, Askren decided otherwise with a historic trade for Demetrius Johnson from one championship to the UFC. Although his victorious debut against Robbie Lawler was surrounded with controversy, it was unquestionably better than a loss, so it was enough of a decent start. That was until his heated rivalry with the BMF himself, George Masvidal, who forced that hype train to a screeching halt and KO'd Askren in a record 5 seconds. This now iconic flying knee was the means in which Ben was handed his very first loss, over a decade undefeated into his career, overturned in a mere instant. With Father Time approaching and his 3-fight UFC contract almost up, there was little opportunity left for Askren to bounce back. Unfortunately for him, his next fight would see him losing consciousness again inside the octagon, this time at the hands of BJJ grappling sensation Damian Maia. Askren would soon after announce his retirement for good, ending his once pristine record with 2 brutal losses. Number 2, Ronda Rousey. Not merely was Ronda Rousey one of the few undefeated UFC champions in her day, she also reached unprecedented levels of stardom for her accomplishments in the sport. The former Olympic bronze medalist utilised her judo skill set to take over women's MMA and catalyse the introduction of female fighters into the UFC. Armbars were handed out left, right and centre, pay-per-view numbers were growing alongside her Hollywood exploits, and when Ronda started knocking out her opponents with punches and knees, well, let's just say some overestimations about her abilities on the feet were greatly exaggerated.
I was like, she could probably beat half the men bantamweights in the UFC.
Is that true?
No, it's not. Definitely not true. I shouldn't have said it at the time.
But this would all come crashing down in devastating fashion when Holly Holm dismantled and brutally finished Rousey in front of the largest live crowd in UFC history. A viral moment that truly reached worldwide infamy, and it was evident that Ronda took her first loss in MMA to heart when she went completely dark, disappearing from the public eye, and when she did finally return over a year later, was only greeted with the same outcome. This time it happened much quicker and even more violently at the hands of Amanda Nunes. Ronda went from 12 straight and almost effortless victories to having her fearlessness and air of invincibility completely stripped away, which simply became too much for her to overcome. Number 1, Mark Kerr. It was kind of disappointing to see so many appear to have absolutely no idea who this man was when The Rock announced that he'd be making a biopic about Mark Kerr's life story at UFC 244. At one point in time, he won 12 fights without a single loss, a feat that shows his incredibly early dominance, but would unfortunately be nearly mirrored with hard losses as the years went on. He began his career in 1997 winning the World Vale Tudo Championship tournament in Brazil, followed by back-to-back UFC tournament victories. He was even considered by many to be better than Mark Coleman, who had just won the UFC's first heavyweight championship, because of Kerr's well-rounded submission game that no elite level wrestlers yet had in those days. After this incredible run, he continued his winning ways in Pride, but was finished with knees by Igor Vochanchin, and although it was overturned to a no contest, as Kerr was a downed opponent, backstage footage from the incredible documentary The Smashing Machine showed he took it like a true loss. Once you factor in his own pain med addictions and personal issues, it was a volatile recipe with disastrous effects. He would appear to improve things with the win against Enson Inoue in his first return in the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, but then he was upset by the iron-headed Kazuyuki Vegeta, and it's this first official loss that would mark a lasting change on his career. Over the next 9 years, he'd win just 3 more times, taking his win-loss ratio from that previous 12-0 to an astonishing 15-11. Thanks so much to Charlie Howard for writing this list. You can go follow him at MMA_Charlie, and thanks so much to Max Blessed Randall for editing it. You can follow him at Max_Randall. Thanks for watching that video. Please do like and subscribe. We upload 3 jaw-droppingly juicy MMA videos a week to get your teeth into, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to follow us at OnPointMMA and Tom A. Ransom on Twitter, and you make sure you have a great day.